Hello. So, this is part one of Unlearning Yourself. If you watched the introduction that we filmed, you saw us use different colored lenses and how it can change what we see because, your eyes work the way your eyes work. And I had told you that that's due to a story, a lot of what we see in the world. So, we're going to talk more about that and about just basically how humans develop the story that they take through life, unless they wake up and change the story, become aware of it, and then they know, what do I want to change about this or not? So if I talk about waking up, I don't mean like I'm woke or any of that kind of stuff. I'm just explaining to you what I know as an educator, as a person who's lived for 62 years and has had many different occupations and abilities and things that have happened to me. And I believe for a reason I've been through those things in order to get to this point to share with you. So let's start about before you were ever born. In fact, the truth of the matter is, before you were ever born, before your parents were ever born, before their parents were ever born, all the things that all the people in your family that brought you into the world has affected you. And if you are now a parent, it has affected your child. And you might go like, well, you mean like DNA? And it's part of it, yes. But part of what gets sent to each generation from former generations is a form of fear. And the fear is passed on, and it's intentional. If it's intentional through your parents, it's usually done out of love or out of habit. If it's been passed on through generations, through governmental control, through way back in the ages, kings and queens and that kind of thing. So we'll call that authority. So this is either put in your life through natural experiences, taught experiences, or traumas. And traumas would be things that create fear. So like a trauma could be something like if you were a child, and I'll give you my child's example. I was baking cookies once, and my oldest daughter was going to reach for the cookies on the tray that was cooling. I said, don't touch that, that'll burn your hand. And she touched it, and it burned her hand. And that, of course, she remembers that from when she was teeny tiny. But the truth of the matter is, that was a fear-based learning, and she will never touch anything hot again because of it. And so that's also called, when we teach children, or you're raising children, it's called a natural consequence. So like for me, at my age now, a natural consequence is I like to eat carbohydrates that I shouldn't, thus my ample figure. So that's a natural consequence. I eat things that aren't just healthy for me, and so my body pays the toll for it. And I'm aware of it, and that's up to me to change. So, but that behavior came from way back, and I won't go into that much detail. But how this works is this, and I'm just going to give examples, and I'll use myself mostly for this. Before I was born, my mother and father married, and they came to that marriage with their backgrounds. My father came from a divorced family, which was almost unheard of back then. And you were really considered low on the stature of where you fit in society. If you came from a divorced family, that was something that my dad carried through his whole life. He was embarrassed by it. His father ended up doing some time in the penitentiary. I think I hear the ground rumbling as he rolls over in his grave while I'm sharing this. But it was really a thing with my dad. I didn't even know really about this until I got older. Of course, now I can understand how all of it has affected me, and even through me, my children. So my dad already had that kind of background. My mom came from a middle-class family, but both her parents had grown up in pretty close to poverty. My grandfather, her father, his mother died while he was quite young, and his sisters were more like moms to him. And so he married my grandmother, who grew up in a very strict German household. Her parents were actually first cousins that had to be married. So that's a whole complicated thing. It gets very complicated, right? Everybody has this in their bloodline at some level. So when people come into the world in an already turbulent, sort of unsavory, according to societal norms, they are already taking on the burden of their parents' experiences. So, like when they say the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, that's what they mean. These things affect the next generation, or the sins of the father. When you hear those phrases, that's what they're talking about. These things carry over from generation to generation. So then I come along, and they have me, and you have my mom, who was raised middle class but had friends that were quite upper class in her community. My dad was an outstanding athlete, but he also, unfortunately, was an alcoholic. So he lost his scholarship to UNL. He had to work for the railroad to earn the money to finish college. He ends up marrying my mother. They have my brother Toby, then me, and then 3 more children, which affects everything in your life. The birth order you're in, the size of your, all this stuff affects you, okay? That's just the stuff you know about. What you don't know about is that every child from conception until for sure by the age of 8 is forming what we call an ego, E-G-O. Your ego is your personality. It's kind of like standard operating equipment that comes with your body from the time you're a baby. So, there's the old joke where you dropped on your head as an infant. That's really not quite so funny, because everything that happens to you, whether you've been picked up and loved as an infant, whether you were ignored and your needs weren't met, maybe a mother is not just emotionally available for a child, all these things shape the future person that you're going to be, and you have no control in it. You don't even remember it. And so you go through infancy into your toddlers and on through, and unless some really traumatic thing like touching a hot cookie sheet happens to you, and she's got a couple others I'm sure she'd share, you don't really remember most of your childhood, because you're in a state of mind, your brain waves are in sort of like a hypnotic state, and little children take in everything. So that's why just drop an F-bomb around a little kid and all that kid will say then, because they get such a reaction from everybody if they do that, they know that's power in that. I don't know why, I don't understand the norm yet, but I know that that's powerful. So children are constantly like a sponge. And if we would just raise them like that, knowing that everything they're exposed to is shaping their future, we would definitely do things different. But most people don't know this when they're raising children. They're trying to get by, they're trying to pay bills, they fight in front of their children, they drink in front of their children, and they just think, well, they're little kids, what does it matter? Well, it matters a great deal, and it mattered in your life. You probably wouldn't be doing those things if you hadn't seen it modeled. So you're going forward through life, you get to that level of maturity, then from that point on, the body goes in, or the brain goes into another stage, and that's where you grow on that personality. But by 8 years old, for sure by 9, your personality was shaped, unless you're just mentally ill and doing something different. We have 5 children in my family, 5 very different personalities. However, when we're together, people who know us separately would say, oh my gosh, you all do that same mannerism, or you all do that same thing with your voice, or because that was learned before we were 8 years old. So hopefully you're staying with me on this. Once you hit 8 or 9, you go into another phase of brain development. And what happens at that phase is you start to take on your experiences and you add it to the story that was created before you had a say in it. So then that's when you have best friends, and that's when you're influenced more by your peer group. For sure, by the time you're in your teens, your peer group becomes more important than your original family. If it doesn't, then you develop a whole nother kind of problem in your story. So we keep developing in a practical survival way, and that creates what we call the ego. So you're going to hear me talk a lot about the ego and other things. And I want you to think of the best way I can explain how the ego affects your life daily. The ego is built into you like a computer program. It's there to keep you alive. Another thing to remember about the ego is the ego wants to stay alive. So the ego will do anything, and I'm saying ego, not eagle, ego, E-G-O. It's meant for survival of you, the body, and you, the brain. It does not want to die, and that's what keeps you going. That's like, that's why if someone commits suicide, we know it's chemical and it's altered the programming in the brain. And that's a whole complicated thing. I won't get into all that, but we need to understand the importance of this ego as we move forward. If you have questions, please type them into the comments. I would be happy to answer them in the next part. And we're going to get in, so this is going to combine ego, which is your physical self and you're associating with your body. And we're also going to start talking about what we call a spirit or a soul. It's different things in different cultures, but how the two of them affect your existence, basically. So thank you for listening. We're done with number 1 in our series, and I am open to any questions and to help you. Thank you.